Hey folks, welcome to this episode of the Law of Self-Defense. Very glad to see you all here. Sorry I'm a couple minutes late. It's kind of a little bit of a hectic Friday for us. Given our big day tomorrow, Saturday, October 1st, is our last Law of Self-Defense advanced class, our full day class on self-defense law, last one of 2022. I hope a bunch of you are planning to be there. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. For those who don't know, I am, of course, Attorney Andrew Branco for Law of Self-Defense. Thank you. Thank you very much. That is so humbling. And the headline for today's show had to do with Alec Baldwin. That actually will be a very short segment of the show. We do have a bunch of other topics I also want to cover. It's difficult to communicate half a dozen different topics in the YouTube title, however. So we'll talk about Alec Baldwin, particularly about how I've talked in the past about how he's, to my mind, pretty clearly guilty of involuntary manslaughter in the shooting death of Halyna Hutchins. I've talked about how there's a theoretical legal path to get to a conviction for felony murder. There's also a theoretical legal path to get to a conviction for murder. So we're going to talk about that, looking simply at the relevant New Mexico murder statute. We're also going to watch an interview from one of Alec Baldwin's fellow actors on the set of Rust. This guy's name is Jensen Ackles. I've never heard of him before, but I don't watch a lot of popular media. Apparently, he's a fairly popular actor. He was a co-actor with Alec Baldwin on this movie Rust that was being filmed. And he describes in his interview with police his personal safety procedures and handling firearms on a movie set that would have absolutely prevented the death of Halyna Hutchins if that gun had been in the hands of Jensen Ackles and not Alec Baldwin. So we have video of that interview. I'll share that video with everyone here. We also have video of a off-duty Alabama police officer who is just in his driveway, and it looks like somebody just tries to run him over with a Jeep, and the officer ends up firing a bunch of shots into the Jeep. We'll discuss the relevant law there with everybody. So this, of course, is being simul-streamed on YouTube, on Rumble, and for our Law of Self-Defense members. I guess I should make sure that yes, it is. The member dashboard's running. The Rumble stream is also running. But when we get to the video for the Alabama police officer who shoots this maniac in the Jeep, we're only going to show that to our members. We'll show that after we transition off of YouTube, off of Rumble, and we're left only with the Law of Self-Defense member stream, because every time I show these videos on YouTube, they just demonetize my show, so it's rather pointless. I'm also going to cover briefly the news that the criminal charges against Shannon Brandt. Shannon Brandt was the Democrat activist in, I think it was North Dakota, who ran over and killed an 18-year-old, Kayler Ellingson, for the offense of Kayler Ellingson being Republican-minded. Just ran him over with his car and killed him. He had been initially charged with some lesser degree offenses. Those have been upgraded. Vehicular homicide was what he was originally charged with, which, folks, is what you would charge an unintentional killing in a vehicle done recklessly. Drunk driving killing would be vehicular homicide, for example. This was clearly not that. It's pretty much indisputed by the driver, Shannon Brandt's own testimony, that he did this intentionally. So those charges, appropriately enough, have been upgraded to simple murder. I've seen some news reports that they've been upgraded to felony murder. That's a misunderstanding by those people, and partly because of sloppy reporting. He's been charged with murder, which happens to be a felony, and some people are mangling it a bit. We'll talk about the difference between those two things. And then we're going to take a number of questions sent in from our Law of Self-Defense Platinum members. Our platinum members have a dedicated Q&A form they can use to send questions directly to my attention. And if they want, they can specify that I answer those questions privately, or we can answer them publicly, which is what we'll be doing here. But all those questions are guaranteed to be answered. And perhaps once we transition over to the Law of Self-Defense members only stream, which is not a transition for the members, just stay where you are. If you're on your member dashboard, the transition is nothing for you to see or do. You just stay where you are. But once we're Law of Self-Defense members only, I'll share the link if you'd like to come on the show live and interact directly with me, ask your questions directly with me, so the audience can also see and hear you on the show. That's the live call-in portion of the show. Now, again, as I've mentioned, portions of today's show will be for Law of Self-Defense members only. And you won't get to see those or participate in those if you're not a Law of Self-Defense member. The good thing is Law of Self-Defense membership is extremely inexpensive. It's less than $10 a month. It's only about 25 or 30 cents a day. Let's see if I have anything to pop up. I'll change my little name thing here on my name. If you'd like to become a member, you can do that instantly and be able to participate in the entirety of today's show. You can do that at lawofselfdefense.com/join. We turned off the super chat function and the member function on YouTube, folks. I don't want you sending any money to YouTube. Not some of you were spending $5 or $10 or $20 a show on YouTube to send us money. Don't do that. Just it's $9.95 to be a Law of Self-Defense member for an entire month, not just one show. So I encourage you to do that. lawofselfdefense.com/join. All right. And the last thing before we jump into the substance of today's show is, of course, I mentioned it briefly earlier, tomorrow. It's like the old commercials, right? Sunday. Well, for us, it's Saturday. Tomorrow is our last Law of Self-Defense Advanced show for the entire year, for 2022. We do these full-day Law of Self-Defense shows only once or twice a year. We did one back in January. We're doing one tomorrow, Saturday, October 1st. This is the course you want to take, folks, if you want to be genuinely hard to convict. If you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, your property, it's to a large extent, it's most of what I know after 30 years practicing exclusively use of force law. It's a big day. It's 6+ hours, but we are, for the first time ever, making it possible for you to enjoy the first hour of the class for free. So the first hour of tomorrow's class, of course, the paying students will have their Zoom link. They should have already received their Zoom link information. Anybody else can join us on YouTube tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern time. For the first hour of the show, we'll simul-stream the first hour, and you'll be given an opportunity to sign up for the rest of the class if you like. So that link on the screen, lawofselfdefense.com/first hour free, is where you would go to click over to YouTube, hit the little notify me button so you get a reminder in the morning. That's where the first hour of the show will be. And folks, I would not plan anything else for the rest of tomorrow. After you've seen the first hour, I expect virtually all of you are going to want to stay, register for the remainder of the day. But you don't have to. There's no cost or obligation. If you decide the first hour is enough for you, that's fine. No offense taken. lawselfdefense.com/first hour free. I will say that we are continuing the 50% off registration for this class right up until it starts tomorrow. So if rather than get the first hour for free and then pay full tuition, you like our content enough that you'd like to simply sign up for the entire course, the entire full day course at half price, you can do that at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. Lock in that 50% tuition discount, or you can do the try before you buy approach and just join us in the morning for the first hour of the show on our YouTube channel. Then you'll be given a chance to sign up for the day, but at the normal tuition cost. All right, so that is all the promotional stuff I needed to cover. So let's take a look at first, pulling up my little agenda item here, my agenda list. Let's take a look at this path for Alec Baldwin to get to murder. So just in a nutshell, I've done many shows on this, folks. And if you want to see them, we have a shortcut URL, lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin will take you to a page that aggregates our previous coverage of all this. But in a nutshell, the crime of involuntary manslaughter is effectively when you unintentionally kill someone as a result of recklessness. Recklessness is a heightened degree of mental state above negligence. Negligence is when you should know that you're creating an unjustified risk of death to other people, but you don't actually know. But a reasonable and prudent person in your circumstances would know, and then that negligent conduct kills somebody. That would result in a wrongful death suit in civil court, but negligence is only enough for civil liability. It's not enough for criminal liability. For there to be criminal liability, you have to have a heightened mental state above negligence. Again, negligence is where you should have known you were creating an unjustified risk, but you didn't actually know. But a reasonable and prudent person in your circumstances would have known. Recklessness is where you knew that you were creating an unjustified risk of death and you ignored that risk and did it anyway. And recklessness is essentially automatically in place if what would otherwise have been negligent conduct is conduct done with an inherently dangerous instrument. An inherently dangerous instrument are things that simply cannot be handled without a substantive risk of death, and everybody knows it. So those would be things like explosives, dangerous chemicals, heavy construction equipment, dangerous drugs, or firearms are inherently dangerous instruments. We all know that firearms are dangerous. That's their purpose to a large extent. So if you're handling a firearm in a manner that is likely to cause death or serious bodily injury in an unjustified manner, and then death results, that's a reckless killing, reckless unlawful killing, which is the definition of involuntary manslaughter. So here Alec Baldwin was handling a firearm, an actual gun. He knew it was an actual gun. He's never denied that. He knows guns are dangerous. He's on the board of a gun control organization that exists because guns are dangerous. He's been on many films where he's handled guns, has had lots of training by professionals on the safe handling of guns, including for this movie on which he was on the set, the movie Rust. And a fundamental rule of gun safety is that you always presume a gun is loaded unless you've personally verified otherwise while that gun is in your hand. You never take someone else's word for a gun being unloaded because it's the unloaded guns that make the loudest bangs. You also never point the muzzle of a gun at anything you're not willing to kill or destroy. Because we all know the dangerous end of the gun is the muzzle. That's where the bullet comes out of. None of us would consider it reasonable to simply have someone hand us a gun and point that gun at another human being. Certainly not if we've failed to first ensure that there's no live ammo in that gun. Of course, Alec Baldwin did all these things in the moments immediately preceding the shooting death of Halyna Hutchins. He took possession of the gun. He did not ensure that it was not loaded. He pointed the muzzle directly at Halyna Hutchins, and the gun discharged. Well, that conduct of pointing a gun you have not ensured is unloaded at another human being, unless somehow justified, which no one's argued justification here, is reckless conduct. You know, you're presumed to know because you're handling an inherently dangerous instrument. You know that pointing that weapon at another human being without ensuring it's unloaded creates an unjustified risk of death to others, and then death results. It's classic involuntary manslaughter. Classic. So to my mind, there's always been, from the first days after this happened, I began covering it. To my mind, there's a pretty open and shut conviction for involuntary manslaughter against Alec Baldwin if the local prosecutor wants to take the case to trial. Still an open question. There's political reasons they might not want to, but if they want to, if it were you or me who had done this, you can be fairly confident you'd be staring hard at an involuntary manslaughter conviction, which has a presumptive sentence of only 18 months under New Mexico law, but which New Mexico gun sentencing enhancement law suggests would have an additional mandatory minimum 5 years attached. So at least 5, potentially 6.5 years in prison if convicted on the facts of this case. I've also talked about how there's a theoretical legal path to a conviction for felony murder, which then would be sentenced just like murder, potentially life in prison without possibility of early release. And that's if there's evidence, if there was video of this event that suggests, from which a jury could reasonably infer, from which a prosecutor could argue, that Alec Baldwin was not only pointing the muzzle directly at Halyna Hutchins, he was doing it for the purpose of frightening her. The famously ill-tempered Alec Baldwin, the man who physically aggresses, it seems, against paparazzi who he finds annoying. So someone who's not afraid to use his size to intimidate. And the set of a movie or TV show for the actors can be extremely repetitive, boring, irritating. You do things over and over and over again. And there was this kind of repetitive action going on. Alec Baldwin's talked about it himself in TV interviews at the moment just before the shot fired. And is it possible he was getting irritated, felt like he was being disrespected? Maybe. We'd have to see evidence to support that. But if his mental state was one of, you know what, I'm going to give that snotty little cinematographer a little scare, snap the hammer with the muzzle pointed at her. Well, that's aggravated assault with a firearm, folks, and that's a felony. And then if death results, you're looking at felony murder. Now, there are some technical legal arguments why I know some folks think that aggravated assault here would not be an adequate predicate felony for felony murder. I disagree. There's some what we would call dicta references in some New Mexico case law saying aggravated assault can't be a predicate felony for felony murder. I think that is dicta, meaning it doesn't really carry precedential weight. The issue was not one that the court in question was actually deciding. It was kind of, side language. And normally that kind of side language that's not essential to the actual decision in the case, it's called dicta. It's treated just as a side comment, not as something that was carefully thought out by the court. But that would be the theoretical path to a felony murder conviction, potentially life in prison, rather than just, presumptively 18 months plus 5 years for the gun involuntary manslaughter. But there's also a path to murder, not just felony murder where you have to have some underlying predicate felony, but straight up murder. And we see that in New Mexico's murder statute itself. Let me pull that up. I believe I have that prepared here. I do. Look at this. I am so good at this. All right. Let's see. I'm going to make that bigger so we can read it. New Mexico statute section 30-2-1, simply titled murder. A murder in the first degree is the killing of one human being by another without lawful justification or excuse. Justification would be like self-defense. Excuse would be like an insanity defense, for example, without lawful justification. And by the way, Baldwin's never claimed a legal justification, legal excuse for this killing. He's tried to say it's other people's fault. But the killing of one human being by another without lawful justification or excuse by any of the means with which the death may be caused, and then a list a variety of ways. One is by any kind of willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing. So this would be what we think of classically as murder. I hate you. I decide to kill you. I fire a bullet into you and you die. Now, premeditated, folks, does not mean pre-planned. Pre-planning would, of course, be premeditation, but premeditation simply means that you formed that intent in your mind, and that can happen in an instant. It doesn't take some length of time. It doesn't take the shopping list with the, clothesline, duct tape, chloroform. All of that, of course, would be evidence of premeditation. You've thought things through. but the premeditation itself can happen in an instant. So that's kind of classic murder, willful, deliberate, premeditated killing. A second way, in the commission or attempt to commit any felony. Well, this would be the path to felony murder, which we just discussed. And then the third way, and this is one, the theoretical legal path to murder for Alec Baldwin that does not require proving a predicate felony, and that is the killing of one human being by another without lawful justification or excuse by any act greatly dangerous to the lives of others, indicating a depraved mind, regardless of human life. Well, is pointing a real gun at another human being without ensuring it's not loaded and snapping the hammer, is that an act greatly dangerous to the lives of others? If someone were doing that to you, would you consider that their conduct to be greatly dangerous to your life? What if they were doing it to your wife? If they pointed that gun at the head of your child and you know they didn't check to make sure it was unloaded and they're snapping the hammer, would you consider that an act greatly dangerous to the life of your child? It looks like it to me. Certainly, I could make that straight face argument. I think any prosecutor could. Remember, prosecutors argued that Rittenhouse had nothing to fear from his attackers, right? Hey, everyone's got to take a beating every now and then. Prosecutors argued that Kim Potter, who everyone agreed had no idea she had a gun in her hand, that she was guilty of criminal recklessness, of knowingly creating a risk that her suspect, Daunte Wright, could be shot by her. And how you do that without knowing you have a gun in your hand at all, which the state never contested. This is certainly a more straightforward, straight-faced argument of criminal liability than the prosecutors in those trials were more than comfortable arguing. And I think it certainly would be an argument I could see a prosecutor making in the case, the murder trial of Alec Baldwin, should such a trial occur, if, of course, they wanted to. Still an open question on whether or not they wanted to. And whoever commits murder in the first degree, folks, is guilty of, guess what? Not just the potential of life in prison, but it's a capital offense. I don't remember offhand if Mexico does the death penalty. Google it real quick. Probably not. It's a fairly liberal state. Now, it looks like in 2009, New Mexico became the 15th state to abolish the death penalty. So it's nominally on the statute books a capital offense, but we'd be looking at life in prison, not actual execution under New Mexico law. All right, so that's the theoretical path by which Alec Baldwin could be convicted, not just of involuntary manslaughter, not just of felony murder predicated on an underlying aggravated assault with a deadly weapon upon Halyna Hutchins, but simply murder by killing someone in the course of engaging in an act greatly dangerous to the lives of others, indicating a depraved mind. Okay, the next topic I wanted to cover was I have a little bit of video here of this guy. This guy is an actor, Jensen Ackles. Again, I don't really know him. I'm not familiar with his work, but apparently he's been doing this for 20 years or so. So he's been around, experienced. I think he's on some other currently popular TV shows or movies. He's apparently done quite a bit of Western type shows, has had lots of firearms training himself, much as Alec Baldwin has had. And he was a co-actor on the set with Alec Baldwin, on the set of Rust, where Baldwin would shoot and kill Halyna Hutchins. And he's being interviewed here by police officers, not as a suspect, but simply as a witness, someone familiar with activities at the set. I'm not even sure he was personally present for the actual shooting. But here, very early in the interview, he's talking about how he himself handles guns. And he says here, well, this was a Western. He was kind of a gunfighter role, I guess. He says he had the gun was part of his costume. He was handling it every day. And he describes what he does when the gun is handed to him. And what he does, folks, would absolutely guarantee that a killing like Alec Baldwin's killing of Halyna Hutchins could not happen with any gun in the hands of this guy, Jensen Ackles, who follows his own safety procedure. But of course, that in fact, did happen when the gun was in the hands of Alec Baldwin, who failed to follow reasonable safety procedure. So let's listen to what Mr. Ackles has to say. I believe it's a very short clip, just a clip of video. He was interviewed for, I don't know, well over an hour, but I just chopped out the few seconds in which he's talking about this in particular. If I can only find it, of course. Let me see. I know I pulled it up. Oh, here it is. Let me see. Trying to optimize this for everybody. All right, here we go. It's less than a minute long. So relax and enjoy yourselves, folks.
And we had gotten into shootouts and stuff prior to this. So, I handled a gun almost, every day. I mean, it was part of my costume. They would hand me a gun in the morning. I would check it. I would do my own checks.
He would do his own checks.
I've been in the industry for 25 years. I've had a lot of onset and offset training for firearms.
Just like Alec.
So my quick check is if they hand it to me, they show me all of the dummy rounds in the wheel. And then I just take it, and armorers hate this, but I just dry fire it into the ground 6 times. That's my own personal check. They're like, oh, don't do that. It's going to hurt the firing pin. I'm like,
that's what they need to do.
So what?
Yeah.
I want to know that all of these are actual dummies.
Oh, it's going to hurt the firing pin. So what? So what? First of all, I don't believe that's true. But second of all, even if it were, the consequence of not checking is potentially the death of a human being. When that's the risk, folks, of failure, you absolutely have to ensure failure, especially when it's so easy. He takes a look at the dummy rounds to make sure they're dummy rounds, and then he dry fires every single chamber in that revolver at the ground. So if, heaven forbid, a live round got in there by mistake, that round's going to hit the ground and not strike and kill a mother and wife, Halyna Hutchins, and inflict a gunshot wound on the man standing behind her. That's all he had to do. That's all Alec Baldwin had to do. Such a small thing. And this actor, Ackles, does he know that there's not supposed to be live rounds anywhere in a set already? Is he aware of that? Yeah. If we watched more of this, he would talk at length about how there should never be live rounds on a movie set. So he knows that shouldn't be a risk, that live round. He knows it shouldn't be a problem. Does he check anyway? Yes, he does. Does he know that there's an armorer, other safety people who have the formal job responsibility of safety with these firearms? Ensuring there's no live ammo, ensuring the guns are safe to handle by the actors. Yeah, he knows that. He's been in the industry 25 years. He's well aware that there's an armorer. There's other people in the chain of safety besides him. Before him, everybody before him. Does he check the gun anyway? Does he check the dummy rounds to make sure they're dummies? Does he dry fire every chamber into the ground? Yes. Why? Because the consequence, the predictable consequence of not doing that is the death of a human being. That's why it's reckless to point a gun at another human being without ensuring that it's first unloaded. And that's why, in my professional opinion, there's a pretty open and shut case against Alec Baldwin for at least involuntary manslaughter here. Okay, next we have this weird case. So I'm just going to talk about it here. I have the video for this event, and I will share the video, but I'm only going to share it after we stop the YouTube and Rumble streams. I'll share it with the Law of Self-Defense member audience because it involves gunshots and violence. And when I put it on YouTube, they demonetize my show, which I don't really care about the demonetization. It's not that much money. But when you're demonetized, they grossly constrain the ability for people to find your content, to be shown your content. And the only reason we're on YouTube at all is to get our content out in front of people. So we just can't risk the demonetization, not for the money purposes, but for the distribution purposes of our content. So when we stop YouTube and Rumble and Today's Show, we get to the Law of Self-Defense members. I'll share this with you. But here, for everybody, I'll just kind of describe what happened. So the video starts with this off-duty officer wearing shorts and I think it's a t-shirt, holding a cell phone. He saw this Jeep out at the end of his driveway, and it seemed to be unusual, suspicious. So he walks out there to see what's going on. Maybe somebody needs help. When the video actually starts, we hear what sounds like gunshots. They're not actually gunshots. I believe it's the Jeep driving into this vehicle on the left, which is, by the way, a police vehicle. I guess this officer is allowed to take a vehicle home with him. Sometimes that's permitted by different departments. Maybe he's on call. Who knows? But in any case, I believe that's his vehicle. The Jeep drives into the vehicle hard enough that a fender comes off one or the other of the vehicles. So it's really a crash event, and then there's more kind of verbal interaction between the officer and the driver of the vehicle. Then the officer runs back to his house. This is all captured on Ring camera from the officer's carport on the side of his house. The officer runs towards the camera, towards his house, and then the driver of the Jeep also runs towards the camera, towards the house. After the officers apparently gone into his home, the driver of the Jeep doesn't go into the home. He gets to the edge of the carport, turns around, starts walking back to the Jeep. And as he's approaching his Jeep, the officer comes back out of his house, now with a gun, a pistol, starts ordering the Jeep driver to show his hands. The Jeep driver get on the ground. He's going to obviously subject the Jeep driver to arrest now, presumably for attempted murder, because the Jeep driver had tried to kill him with the car, or at least aggravated assault, aggravated battery, whatever, with the vehicle. By the way, is a vehicle a deadly weapon? If it's being used to threaten or inflict death or serious bodily injury, yes, folks, it's being used as a deadly weapon. That's a deadly force attack. So now the officer is going to make an arrest for this unjustified deadly force attack upon him. The driver of the Jeep does not comply, does not show his hands, get on the ground. Instead, he gets back in the Jeep, even while the officer has him at gunpoint. And ultimately, he'll reverse the Jeep, and then he'll speed forward again, strike the officer with the Jeep, carry him clear out of the frame of the camera. And then we hear a little more talking. And the reason this came up was because it was part of an inquiry from one of our Law of Self-Defense members, our Platinum members, who'd suggested in his question that he did not feel this officer would have been legally justified in coming out of his home with the gun. The question's a little poorly worded by the Platinum member. It's a little ambiguous, I should say. But anyway, I thought I would step through the legalities of that. So we have an off-duty police officer here. He's got arrest powers in the state of Alabama, presumably where this took place. Once he has probable cause to believe a crime's been committed, he has grounds for an arrest. And if the probable cause is for a violent act, he's got grounds to have his gun out, both for purposes of self-defense and to attempt to compel compliance with the lawful arrest. And here, the underlying act for which there's probable cause is an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, to wit, a vehicle being used as a deadly weapon. So yeah, the officer would have every justification to come out with a gun to make that arrest. Frankly, I think, and I'd love to hear from, if there's any LEOs watching today's show, I think the officer does a very poor job here tactically in an effort to compel the arrest. He puts himself in an extremely vulnerable position, and he gets vulnerabilized. I mean, poor judgment here, but we'll talk more about that when we actually show the video. That'll be for our Law of Self-Defense members after we wrap up the YouTube and Rumble streams. The next thing, so we'll circle back to this case in just a moment for our Law of Self-Defense members. The next thing was, I just wanted to mention briefly this situation with this monster Shannon Brandt out in I believe it's this one. Out in North Dakota, he's in the orange on the right. He's apparently is a Democrat leaning, had some kind of verbal confrontation with the young man on the left, Kaylor Ellingson, 18 years old at the time of his death. Well, Shannon Brandt, the guy on the right, Democrat leaning, learned that apparently had some kind of verbal argument with Kaylor Ellingson because Ellingson was Republican leaning. And Brandt decided to resolve this verbal confrontation by running Ellingson over with his car intentionally and killing him over what had been up to that point a purely verbal political dispute. He had originally been charged, Brandt, and unfortunately Ellingson died as a result of the injuries. Not merely from being struck by the car, but by having been run over by the car. So, I mean, there's no dispute here that this was intentional, this infliction of force, deadly force on Ellingson, young Ellingson. And the driver was originally charged with vehicular homicide, which is really a form of reckless homicide, unintentional homicide. The parallel would be a drunk driving homicide. So you get drunk, you get behind the wheel of the car to drive home. You're not intending to kill anybody. But you run somebody over in a crosswalk because of your intoxication. Well, you were reckless. You know that drunk driving creates an unjustified risk of death to others, and death resulted. It's classic involuntary manslaughter. And the form of involuntary manslaughter that involves vehicles is often now specifically termed vehicular homicide. But for the underlying legal principles are the same as any reckless involuntary manslaughter. And that's what Brandt was originally charged with, which is weird because he conceded from the start that his running over of Ellingson was intentional. It wasn't that he didn't see him or he was driving too fast or he was drunk and he intended to hit this kid with his car, which would make you think it's an intentional killing. And as it happens, I think just today, the local prosecutor has announced that she's dropped the vehicular homicide charge, but only because she's now replaced it with a murder charge. Let's see. I believe I have that here. So North Dakota charges such poor. By the way, you journalists suck. They have several paragraphs here before you learn who this defendant is or even who his victim was. Charges against a man who struck and killed an 18-year-old with his vehicle have been upgraded to murder, a Class AA felony. So you could just say Shannon Brandt. Charges against Shannon Brandt, comma, a man who struck and killed 18-year-old Kaylor Ellingson, and get the parties' names right in there in the first paragraph, right? What matters. Have been upgraded to murder, a Class AA felony. I don't know why they need to call it that, but by calling it that, I'm not saying they're wrong about that, technically speaking, but now I see a lot of other people picking up this report and citing that Shannon Brandt here has been charged with felony murder. It's not felony murder. It's not murder predicated on some underlying felony in the absence of an intent to inflict deadly force harm. It's just murder. He's just been charged with murder, and murder happens to be itself a felony. So Foster County, North Dakota, the state's attorney, Kara Brinster, dismissed the vehicular homicide charge and some other miscellaneous charges and replaced it with the murder charge, which is good for life imprisonment without parole. What I often refer to, you've heard me refer to as life in prison without possibility of early release. So that is good news. Good news. I don't know why that wasn't done initially, but there you go. An odd case of someone being undercharged initially by a prosecutor as opposed to overcharged. I wonder why. I wonder if there's a political dynamic at play there. I guess we may never know. Okay, and we do have some questions I've lined up from our Platinum members. And most of these, I think I'll answer in the members only part of today's show, but I'll share them with you because they may help you decide whether you'd like to become a member yourself. Because you can submit your own questions then and guaranteed that they're answered on our shows. And of course, you get the benefit of being able to enjoy the members only part of the show. It's less than $10 a month, folks. And you can do that at the little URL on the screen here, lawofselfdefense.com/join. So one question came in from our platinum member, David B. David asked a whole bunch of questions, very detailed. He's asking, let's say a person is involved in a defensive shooting. He's a member of a program like CCW Safe, has a hotline to call from that program, or the police just arrive on the scene. But anyway, that person, that defender, asserts his right to silence, is arrested, taken to the police station. At what point in the process does this person actually get to speak to an attorney? And what if this happens on a weekend? And how complicated can this get? So we're going to answer that question in the members only part of today's show. David B. also asked, what if the person has been unable to contact their attorney or the hotline number for their chosen defense program before police arrive and they've been arrested? Is it generally expected this person would make their one phone call to a trusted family member or friend? We'll talk about that as well. David continues, presumably it would be a good idea to have a packet of information prepared at home for a family member to access in case of such an incident were to occur. Yeah, that would be helpful. We'll talk about that too. And finally, from David, is it ever the case that a person who asserts the right to silence is released before his or her attorney is available? We'll also discuss that. We got another interesting question here from another platinum member, Gary. Gary asks, which of your videos would you recommend to me dealing with disabled veterans and the general public in wheelchairs in the context of self-defense? He's teaching some groups who are disabled in this way. I'm happy to talk about that as well in the members only part of today's show. KT from Georgia says, I don't have $1 million like Alec Baldwin for a lawyer. Could you do a show on some of the things he's trying to say would be helpful for me to know so that I could determine whether or not my lawyer was any good? Because not all lawyers are all that good, folks. Like most professions, they tend to be in a bell curve. One end of the bell curve is world-class attorneys. The bulk of attorneys are somewhere in the middle. And the other end of the bell curve is people you do not want representing you if your life is at stake. So what can you do to position yourself, prepare yourself to be an informed consumer? So you have some chance of knowing whether or not which end of the bell curve your lawyer appears to be on. We'll talk about that as well. We'll also go through that Alabama police officer video shooting in the members only part of the show. As I say, folks, I used to take questions on YouTube as super chats. We've turned off the super chat function. I don't want you to send money through YouTube anymore. We don't do the YouTube member thing anymore. I've turned that off. It was ridiculous. People were spending $5, $10, $20 a show, a good chunk of which was going directly to YouTube, when they could spend less than $10 a month to access all our content, ask as many questions as they want as a Law of Self-Defense member. So again, I would encourage you to consider becoming a Law of Self-Defense member at lawofselfdefense.com/join. And last thing before we do the switch over is just a final reminder. Tomorrow, Saturday, October 1st, is our last Law of Self-Defense advanced class for this year, for all of 2022. It'll probably be March of next year. So a good 6 months from now before we have the next Law of Self-Defense advanced class. This is the full day class. That is the one that makes you hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. This is the law you need to know, the actual Law of Self-Defense. Tomorrow's the last one of these for all of 2022, Saturday, October 1st. And we're trying something new we've never done before. And that is we're going to try. We'll have to see. Hopefully we won't have, internet bandwidth problems doing 2 streams simultaneously. We're going to try to stream the first hour of the show, both to the paying students as well as to the general public on our YouTube channel. So any of you can join us for the first hour of the show. I would not schedule anything for the rest of the day, folks, because once you hear the first hour, you're going to almost certainly want to stay. And you'll have that opportunity to register for the class at the end of that first hour so you can stay with us, be sent the credentials you need to come over to Zoom and join the rest of the paying students in the class. But if you want to try before you buy, you can go to that URL right there, lawselfdefense.com/first hour free. That'll take you over to our YouTube channel. You can click the notify me button to make sure that you don't miss the first hour of tomorrow's show free. And then you can register at the end of the first hour for the rest of the class if you want. Alternatively, you can just sign up for the class. If you sign up for the class ahead of time, you'll get a 50% discount on the tuition, but that goes away once the class starts in the morning. So once you're in the first hour, the 50% discount is gone. First hour is free. You get that upside. Downside is the 50% discount on tuition is no longer available. So if you'd like to lock in the 50% discount, you can do that at lawselfdefense.com/advanced and sign up right now. Sign up today. So you're all set for tomorrow. All right, folks. I am going to sign off on YouTube and Rumble at this point. Law Self-Defense members, if you're watching on your member dashboard, you don't have to do anything. Just stay right where you are. This takes only a moment. For the YouTube crowd, thank you for joining us here again. As always, we really appreciate you. And I will see you next time.